Howdy, howdy, friends and neighbors. This is your old pal B coming to you from deep in the jungles of Java. And today I have a really special guest, somebody I haven't talked to in a coon's age and a handful of donkey's years. And somebody that, honestly, it's a real pleasure to talk to somebody without an accent. Before I get to that, let me remind everybody to reach down and click the like, the share, add a comment. You can help raise the profile of this video with a few simple steps that cost you nothing. And you can do it while you're listening to us, Jawbone. So please give us a little hand and do that. And you can also click over to radiofarside.substack.com for my blog, which is several times a month. And the videos are always available on YouTube, Rumble, and BitChute, except when they're deleted on YouTube. So with all that said, I'm going to introduce somebody that I have great respect for and who's been working for a long time on a project that is near and dear to my heart. And Daniel Miller is president of the Texas Nationalist Movement. We worked together years ago, and he's been a nonstop champion of TEXIT and trying to get things moving. And with that, Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself and catch us up a little bit?
Wow, catch up. Let's see. That's go from wow. I don't even know how long that's going to take. Well, first off, let me just say how much I appreciate you inviting me on, and it's good to see you again.
Absolutely.
It has been many years. But for those of you who don't know, my name is Daniel Miller. As Bernard said, I'm president of the Texas Nationalist Movement. We're outside of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party here in Texas. We're the largest political advocacy organization in the state. And we're advocating for the political, cultural, and economic independence of Texas. The TNM was formed in 2005, but my history with trying to make Texas an independent nation goes all the way back to August 24th, 1996, about 2:00 in the afternoon. And man, that sounds like a long time when you put it that way. So
yeah, you had a blinding light hit you and knock you onto the road. I take it.
It really wasn't like that. I mean, there are people, it's funny because we talk about the journey that people take to realize this, because, people have to understand, if they're trying to come to grips with this, no one really starts out as this is their default position, right?
Right.
We're born into a political system or a culture that is the status quo. That's where we're at.
Right.
And then people grow into this, and let's be honest, back until the 1990s, this was never even really presented as a viable option for anyone. And so, my journey, my personal journey culminated there, right? I refer to it as the line in the sand moment, where you're presented, you've got the facts of the situation, and you have a true decision point where you get to stay in the status quo or you cross that line in the sand.
Right.
And you decide to go do something. And, and that was the day for me where I decided to work to see Texas become a self-governing independent nation, or until the gravedigger pats me in the face with a shovel, whichever comes first.
Yes. Yeah, I know the feeling. Well, let me ask you the obvious question. Why would any state, any people want to leave the great, wonderful, amazing United States shining city on the hill?
Yeah, I think the answer for that to help people understand is different, depending on who's looking at it. For a Texan, there are a lot of good reasons, but for people from the outside looking in, ask yourself this question. Who is better to govern you? You or people that you didn't elect, forcing policies on you that you don't want? It really gets down to that fundamental right of self-determination. But look, I'll tell you how we ultimately make the case for the people of Texas without having to go through all of the reasons that the federal government the relationship with Texas and the federal system is horrible. We don't have to go into all that. We can, but we don't have to. But here's how we essentially make the case. Imagine right now if Texas was like 200 other self-governing independent nations around the world, right? We had control over our own border and immigration policy, our own monetary and economic policy, trade policy, our own taxation policy. We had our own military and national defense policy. We could go out and execute our own travel deals. I mean, we had our own embassies and passports. We had everything that 200 other self-governing independent nations around the world have. And instead of talking about withdrawing from the union, we were actually talking about whether or not we should give up that control and join the union. Knowing everything you know about the federal government today, would you vote to join the union? And if you wouldn't vote to join the union, then why in the world would you stay one moment longer than you had to? Because if self-determination and self-government are inalienable rights, aka we're born with them, they do not come from government, then doing anything other than pursuing self-government and becoming a self-governing independent nation is a willful abrogation. We're giving up our right of self-government. And so, that is what's taken us from this issue polling in single digits in 2005 to, the Survey USA poll that came out in last summer showed that 60% of Texas voters overall and 66% of likely voters would vote yes tomorrow.
Wow.
And that's with a pretty large sample. So, we're on the cusp of getting this issue, but obviously the first thing that we have to do is get it to a vote of the people.
Yeah. Now, when you bring that up, of course, people in our international audience and probably many in the American audience may not be aware that Texas has been an independent nation twice before. Yeah. And the second time was by a popular vote. I believe the final count was 4-1 in favor.
Yeah.
So this is not out of the blue. This is not. Most of the other states have always been states or territories. Texas had that intermediate history, albeit brief, of being an independent nation in 1836 and again in what was it, 1860. So what is the process that we're going through here now? You say 60% or more favor TEXIT,
Yeah.
which is amazing. Compared to where we were a quarter of a century ago, that's stunning to me.
Oh, hey, I mean, look, here's another one. I mean, look, if that there are people who look at that and they don't realize that, that just sort of drops out of the blue, but you have to remember. So you go back to 2005, we were polling in single digits of support, right? Yep. So what that meant, for us, the good news is we always polled higher than the approval rating of the United States Congress, which typically polls right above or below leprosy, right? So, but you look at the trajectory and you go to 2009 and you had this poll come out. It was from Survey USA, not Survey USA, from Research 2000. And what it had was the big headline they had was that it was 35% of Texans believe that Texas would be better off as an independent nation. Okay, well, but when you looked at the crosstabs, when you looked at the breakdowns, that was 48% Republican, 40% independent, and 15% Democrat. You fast forward to 2014, which was the next major poll, right? There was a Reuters Ipsos poll that was conducted here right around the time, not just here, it was conducted in all states, but right around the time of the Scottish independence referendum. Anytime anybody wants independence around the world, they come knocking on our door to find out how we feel. And what was interesting about that was that was the first time we crossed a majority of Republican voters, right? It was 54% Republican, 48% independent, 35% Democrat. So there have been subsequent polls, but those are sort of that show your trajectory. So people understand, look, this 60% and 66% didn't just drop out of the ether, right? I mean, This has been from the moment we founded the TNM and committed to being a true political advocacy organization focused on independence, that number has tracked ever higher. So, for us, this is always great news, but here's one you're going to love. I mean, here in Texas, the dominant political party is the Republican Party, right? I mean, they hold every major statewide office. They have majorities in both houses. This last summer, our folks inside the Republican Party were able to get 2 planks added to the Republican platform calling for a TEXIT vote. And they didn't just pass by the skin of their teeth. They passed with 90% support from the delegates.
Wow.
So, we're looking at the TEXIT vote and the TEXIT issue as part of the political mainstream. We're looking at the idea that Texans should be able to vote on the issue as official policy of the dominant political party in Texas. And so this is where we are. I mean, we're right at the threshold of being able to see this thing happen. Wow. And it's a good place to be.
That's remarkable, especially when I remember that, when I was involved in it, we were basically seen as a bunch of, let's put it truthfully, we were seen as a bunch of farmers and conspiracy nuts.
Oh, and domestic terrorists.
And believe me, I was listed as one for a while.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's to watch. I mean, you think about in those days about how this issue was treated. I mean, we would go and would have an event and you might have 3 or 4 people show up. I mean, you would go talk to people about this and you couldn't find TEXIT supporters with a hunting dog and a Ouija board. I mean, you just, of course we didn't call it TEXIT then, but the point here is that it was important from the foundation of the organization. There was a 2-year study that happened before that. And we can talk about that later if you want to, but it was important for us to understand that the one thing that we had to do was go out and have real conversations and find our people that were, initially those that were ready to deal with it. They're hell or high water. They wanted Texas independence. But more than that, go engage with the voters. I mean, just straight retail politics, man. And that's what happened. That's what we did. We did the hard work. And, when we were out there talking to Texas voters, what we found was not reflected in that single digit polling in 2005. We found people that thought it was a great idea. They would love for it to happen, but they did not believe that it could.
Right. Yeah.
And that was
people like winning teams.
They do, but when people are told a lot of times that something's impossible, they just accept it.
Yeah.
And you think about what the opposition does related to this issue. It's all a bunch of fear, misinformation, and lies, right? We're told all the time that this is unconstitutional. The mainstream media prints that lie over and over. But to dispel that, all we have to do is say, cool, pull out a copy of the Constitution. Please point to me, article and section where it's unconstitutional, because they haven't read it, but we have, and we know that Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution lists everything states are forbidden from doing. And guess what's not in there? Withdrawing, right?
Yep. Exactly.
So, they say, well, it's against the law. Cool. Break out the law and show me. Well, it's treason. Okay. By the way, go back to that previous Constitution and read the definition, because it is the only defined crime. And please tell me how this fits. So, we get to all these things. They talk about the Supreme Court said, okay, great. Texas versus White. So what? Supreme Court's been wrong before, but what about Jacobson v. Massachusetts, which absolutely cuts the legs out from under that Supreme Court case? So, the opposition lives on fear and ignorance, and all we have to do is go out there and combat that, and we win.
Well, and remember that at the time I was involved with this, the media had a lot more credibility, and they were able to demonize the movement and the people involved in it, and nobody questioned it. Now, zoom forward 25 years, and it's a completely different landscape. The media have completely destroyed their credibility. across the board. I mean, none of them have any credibility now. People are looking for genuine solutions to the mess that's become the United States. And that's why I think this is good timing to be able to talk with you now, because there seems to be some progress in, for instance, you mentioned economic independence. Well, now Texas has a bullion bank.
That was one of the things that we helped do.
Yeah. And energy independence, Texas has its own electric grid, which is the only state in the union that does. So there's lots of things that have slowly been building to make a TEXIT reality. But now you guys have been working with the legislature as well. How is that going? What's going on in that realm?
Yeah. So, the thing, when people look at our interactions with the legislature, mostly they only look at the TEXIT bill. I mean, let's be honest. A TEXIT referendum is the sexiest topic about this. It's the one that captures the headlines and everything else. But if you go back to what I said a moment ago about our mission, the political, cultural, and economic independence of Texas, one of the things that came about as part of that 2-year study ahead of the founding of the TNM was a realization that independence is the goal, right? That's where you want to be, but it has to be sort of holistic, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah. In the studies that we did, looking at independence movements around the world, historical, current, at the time, it was very clear that you either get all three or you lose all three. Right. And that's whether it's short term, long term. So if you have a hope to win independence, you have to work on those three things. Plus, a strategic goal for any independence movement or organization, regardless of where they are, is if they want their particular region or state to be independent, they should be constantly working toward those three aspects of independence in whatever situation that they're in. And so in the situation where Texas is, obviously the political independence aspects of it are there, where we're trying to essentially devolve more power to Texas to basically tell the federal government, you don't have the authority here. You see that accomplished through legislation, lawsuits, things of that nature. And that's mostly on a state level, right? There's not too much we can do on that front, except legislatively. Okay. But then you have the cultural independence, which gets into historical preservation and promotion. And then you get into the economic independence aspect of it, which primarily deals with removing these entanglements with the federal system. So a lot of our work, a lot of the focus from the outside is over getting a TEXIT referendum or an independence referendum. And lo and behold, last session, we got legislation filed that would have given Texans a vote on the issue. Now, it didn't get a committee hearing, but we got that same legislation filed this session, same fate. But the point is, you've got a bill that would put TEXIT on the ballot for Texans to vote on, filed in 2 separate sessions of the Texas legislature. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. I mean, it's amazing. But a lot of the other legislation, I mean, the cultural aspect of it, we worked on the bill that eventually decriminalized the Bowie knife, right? I mean, it was so ridiculous that we have a knife named after and sort of carried by and made iconic by a Texas revolutionary hero, and it was illegal to carry, and we got that decriminalized. When the Texas Bullion Depository Act came along, that thing was dead in the water 2 sessions. Before we jumped in that fray, because it promoted our economic independence, and put us one step closer, essentially, to a metals-based currency. So, there's just a lot of those things that we work that don't grab headlines, but again, continue to move this issue closer and closer, and to close that gap so that when Texans do vote on the issue and say yes, it puts us a much shorter gap to jump over to go from where we are to being fully independent.
Right. Yeah. And all of that is great. The next question that would come up now is, the last time states tried this, it was a bloody mess. 600,000 people died,
Yep.
destroyed the country, and Lincoln set up what is basically the federal tyranny now.
Yeah.
I don't see him as a hero, as many people do. Over here, we had East Timor, who finally got independence about 20 years ago. It cost them 100,000 lives. It was also a bloody mess.
Yeah.
That seems to be a pattern among independence movements. Now, there are exceptions. Let's say Czechoslovakia split up in a very peaceful, loving way. Yugoslavia split up, and that's been a mess off and on for a long time.
Right.
But can Texas independence be achieved in a peaceful, wonderful, harmonious way, with minimal, let's say, wet works?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, if you look at independence movements around the world, like the ones you said, the violence aspect of it seems to have a tendency to gravitate more toward non-Western countries, right?
Right.
So, Yugoslavia being an example of what happens when you continue to try to force people together that don't want to be together, right? Right. And so you get balkanization. And so, a lot of those are symptoms of what happens when you don't embrace the right of self-determination. You think about the Sudanese Civil War. It lasted 30 years. I think it was like 1.5 million dead. I mean, it was just massive. But at the moment that they embrace the idea that, look, we can have two countries, right, then the Civil War stopped. Okay. Now, granted, there is some issues in Sudan right now, but those are internal politics and unrelated to the underlying causes of that Civil War.
Right.
So
the big picture, right?
Yeah. So, you find, for every example that you have in the non-Western world of, these violent independence movements over the last 100 years, you look at, and we got a big sample. We have to remember that at the end of World War II, there were roughly 54 recognized fully sovereign countries around the world.
Mhm.
And by the end of the 20th century, there were 195.
Yeah.
So, you got plenty of examples to pick from. But, I would tender to people that what we're doing here in Texas, number one, to your point about the Civil War in the 1860s, number one, it wasn't a civil war. But number two, this ain't the 1860s, right? Mm-hmm. This is the 21st century. And so there are a lot of things that are very different now from the standpoint of the construction of the Union, the framework internationally, particularly where the international community is concerned on the issue of self-determination. Mm-hmm. But I think where the important thing lies is that Survey USA poll that I mentioned earlier. Not only did it was not just conducted in Texas, it was conducted in several other states as well. And one of the questions they polled was, what do you think should be the harshest punishment for a state withdrawing from the Union, peacefully withdrawing from the Union, right? Let's be clear. People going to the polls in a legally constituted election, voting on their political future, and then working their way out the door. Not, okay, we had the vote tomorrow, now we're going to go take over the U.S. Post Office in Austin. Nothing like that. But a peaceful, and what they found was support for any sort of military intervention was less than 10%. So, it's very difficult to prosecute, for the United States for a lot of different reasons, prosecute any type of military intervention on any state, not just Texas, any state that wants to withdraw through that process that I just listed without severe repercussions. And what I tell people all the time, kind of the bottom line, without getting into all the rationale, because honestly, all the reasons why it's very improbable that will happen. I mean, it would take up the entire time that we have together, but I'll just get to the kind of the bottom line here. And it's this, is that if the United States federal government tried to militarily intervene in any state that decided to leave, the pain that would be suffered by that particular state would be temporary, but for the union itself, it would be terminal, because you would have states spinning off, not worrying about process, because it's just not the way we do things. We don't murder people because they didn't vote the way that we don't want.
Well, that's the way it used to be.
And
Given recent history, I don't know.
Well, by and large, I mean, look, the people, you think about it from the standpoint of these people in these other states, right? I mean, and you think about how they have their varying viewpoints on this issue. There will be many of them that would be glad that Texas would be gone.
Sure, yeah.
And there are many states that would eventually want to follow suit, which is why we have to set the best example that we can. We have to be very deliberate in our approach. We have to be very methodical in what we do. We have to be so above the standard that it's sickening, right? I mean, we just have to be just this shining example, because in doing so, it eliminates the federal government's, it limits their responses and limits their ability to respond poorly to what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We always stress process, transparency, process, because we don't want to give them any excuse. If they're going to do something ridiculous, let them do that, but also pay the consequences of that. And that's why I said what I said a moment ago. The pain for us would be temporary, but for them, it would be terminal.
Well, and you're not just dealing with the public image in the other states. Something like this would have global repercussions.
Absolutely.
Because the United States, in many people's minds, and I know because I've lived overseas for many years, the United States is what's the word? Monolithic. It's inseparable. There are no dissent. There is no dissent in the United States, because that's the image that the country puts out. So when people finally start to realize that not just Texas, but I know there's other states that have at least dealt with this in the past, and they may still be dealing with it from a number of different standpoints. I think of California is probably one that's thinking quite a bit about it.
Marcus Ruiz Evans over there with the TEXIT movement. They've been working on this issue for quite some time. You have the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence and New Hampshire Independence PAC. Most people don't even realize New Hampshire literally debated a bill on the floor of their house last session on a constitutional amendment to withdraw from the union. I mean, pass fail is irrelevant to the fact that debate on the floor of a legislature happened, and, Alaskan Independence Party, you dealt with those guys back in the day.
Yep.
Hawaii. Hawaii, second Vermont Republic. We've been talking with an organization that represents an independence movement for the 9 northern states of Mexico. It's self-determination is happening.
Wow.
And people need to embrace it. It's like when people will tell us, they say TEXIT will never happen. It's like, you're the one who's asleep, because TEXIT is literally happening right in front of your eyes.
Right. Yeah. And of course, it's, things that move incrementally, people tend not to see them.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that's why it's important that we get this information out to people so that they understand that not only is there dissent within the United States as to how the country is being run, but that there's well-organized and effective movements that are going that way now, because of the policies of the United States. Out here in the real world, the U.S. is not well liked. Now, that's different from the 1980s, early 80s, when I was traveling, and at that time, the United States was golden. Could do no wrong. An American passport got you everywhere. American dollars got you anything. but it's changed drastically now, where the U.S. is not popular. The U.S. passport is looked at with a little bit of suspicion, and the U.S. dollar is tanking faster than what oil and water. It's but from your perspective, and I know you've mapped this out. Let's say the vote happened tomorrow and it passes. What happens? What's the timeline look like?
Well, the very next day, nothing happens. I mean, Texans will be nursing hangovers, from celebration.
Plenty of that here.
Yeah, you won't be able to find me with a hunting dog and a Ouija board because I need a vacation. I've been doing this a very long time. But no, look, all kidding aside, here's literally nothing happens the next day. The vote itself is an expression of political will, right? Which is the first thing you need to do. Now, the way that we've crafted the Texas Independence Referendum Act, it does a couple of things. Number one, sets the vote, the ballot language. But the second thing that it does is it establishes a legislative committee to begin work on the processes for extracting, right? And there are really four baskets of things that have to be addressed. There's constitutional issues, statutory issues, international covenants, treaties, and agreements, and then finally the negotiated issues with the federal government. And the good news is that we're in the catbird seat for all that. It takes as long as we want it to take. One of the reasons that we've timed the legislation the way that we have to make sure that there's political pressure to get this moving and that it doesn't stagnate. But it's really that process of extraction. And if you think about it, three of those four things don't involve the feds at all. They don't involve anything related to the federal government. I mean, from a practical standpoint, we have to communicate the information. We have to begin the process of opening dialogue to help them understand how this is going to go. But the constitutional issues, statutory issues, and international covenants, treaties, and agreements, those don't involve the federal government at all. Those are all internal processes to Texas. And those things happen on the timetable that we establish. If it happens outside of a regular session, then we call a special session, and we can call subsequent special sessions every 30 days over and over and over until we get them done. On an accelerated timeline, you could see this happen. You could see us get to that negotiation stage in probably 90 to 120 days or sooner, if external circumstances warrant. But it really puts us, and that's the secret. One of the things that we noticed in studying all those independence movements pre-formation of the TNM was those that had the most successful outcomes had the most control over the path and the timeline.
Right.
Yeah. And that is the key for us, is to maintain as much control over the process and the timeline as we possibly can.
Yeah, that well, I think we're still watching Brexit unfold, even though most of the heavy lifting is already finished. There's still lots of paperwork going on in the background, and there's even a repeal movement. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm just saying Brexit's cautionary tale in what happens when you don't have control over your timeline in reality, right? When they invoked Article 50, they had a 2-year clock, but also the danger of allowing elected officials who publicly fought against your right of self-government, having a system in place that leaves them in power to shepherd the process. At least David Cameron did the honorable thing and resigned as prime minister after publicly advocating against Brexit. Right. But unfortunately, the vast majority of the civil service and the elected members of parliament, and they did not have that same sort of fortitude to do so. So cautionary tale.
Well, and even Prime Minister May made a lot of pleasant noises, but once she got in there, she seems to have backed off quite a bit, and wasn't pushing the way that she was expected to. And I think that's always a big danger, is the fear factor of the people involved in getting things done. Would, assuming that it passes substantially, which it sounds like it would, I guess the next thing would be to call a general election and refill all the positions. How would that work?
Well, you stay on the same timetable, right? Law stays as it is until it changes. That's
Right.
just the way that it works. And so it's not like a reboot. It's not like but all of those things. But again, this goes back to the timetable. So let me just kind of walk you through what the timetable looks like. And it also highlights, again, one of the problems that Brexit had in dislodging some of these anti-independence folks from the government. We're on an every 2-year election cycle here.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, we go into a legislative session. Legislative session lasts 140 days. That's every other year. At the end of a legislative session, the next time that you have any, you're basically, the next election starts then. But the November of that year is what we have as the constitutional amendment election. Okay. So that is what we refer to as the next general election after the legislative cycle, which is when constitutional amendments are generally considered. Our legislation calls for the TEXIT vote, even though it's not a constitutional amendment, calls for putting the TEXIT question on that ballot in November. So let's work out the timeline. We have 140 days of a legislative session. Texas Independence Referendum Act passes. The November after would be when Texans go to the polls and vote on this issue. Now, one of the things that is pretty common, the average voter turnout for independence referendums around the world is 85%, okay, which is far higher than any election ever here in Texas, right? So if we just hit the averages and the poll numbers, even at the most conservative lineup, then that means you're going to put about 8.6 to 9.2 million pro-Texit voters in the polls in November, which is more than all the votes cast for every gubernatorial candidate in the last general election. So,
right, yeah.
So we have the vote. It comes back in the way that we anticipate. What most people sort of fail to realize is just a few weeks after that, 2 or 3 weeks, is when the filing window opens for the next election cycle. So that's when candidates begin to file, and that next election is held in March for the primaries, and then on and on. So what that means is Texans will be able to go to the polls and vote on TEXIT. Up to that vote in the open debate, all of these elected officials are going to be essentially politically forced to take a position one way or the other.
Yeah.
Which means that when it comes time for that next election cycle, all those 8.6 to 9.2 million voters are going to know exactly who they need to vote for to get TEXIT across the finish line. That is something we have a luxury of because of how our election schedule works, something that they did not have the luxury of in the UK because of how their elections. So if we're worried about intransigent politicians after a TEXIT win, we need not be, because they're on the chopping block immediately after the vote.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. See, that makes perfect sense. So you're able to clear out the chaff before even the next session of the legislature.
Yes. Cue the clip of Jack Nicholson as the Joker blowing his little party horn and going, "This town needs an enema."
And believe me, Austin certainly does.
Yeah.
It has.
We started referring to it as Moscow on the Colorado.
Man, it couldn't be a better nickname for it. Because, my father was in the legislature for 12 years. And this is in the 60s, and it was a piss hole back then. And from everything I've heard, it's gotten much, much worse now.
Yeah. And look, a lot of that, oddly enough, man, you and I can have this conversation. It's something that I have I hear it all the time during Q&A when I speak. People are like, they make that same observation, and they say, well, how is our government going to be any better? It's like, well, you have to understand why government, even here in Texas, is fundamentally broken.
Mm-hmm.
And you can draw a through line to every aspect of it straight to our relationship with the federal government.
Yep.
You know, if I were to walk down the street here and ask people who is the Speaker of the House, if they could answer at all, they would probably answer with the federal speaker, right?
Right.
Not who the state speaker is, not Dave Phelan. And that's because, and that's just one example, that's because the federal government we're inundated with them on a 24-hour news cycle, and they suck all the oxygen out of the room.
Yeah.
So what's happening at the State House goes under the radar. People don't know what they're doing by and large because it's not promoted big. But then you look at the thing like part of the reason that we have challenges with our government here is campaign finance. I mean, I think most people can agree that here money kind of runs politics, and it really gets down to campaign finance. And so it's against the law here to take foreign campaign contributions, which means that, you know, candidates can't accept money from Mexico or Canada or Russia or China or any of these other places. Well, at the moment TEXIT happens, California and New York and all those places become foreign to Texas. And so that tap of money that pours in from all those places into these candidates stops. You know, those two things alone, just greater attention and the change in campaign finance, changed the entire landscape for politics here in Texas.
That's exciting. I like that.
Makes me happy.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Wow. What currently is killing the bills in the legislature? What is it? Not enough votes? Do you need more people in there that are sympathetic? What's keeping it down?
That's primarily it. You know, we're fighting against a political establishment that on one hand says no one believes this and no one wants this.
Yeah.
But will not put it to a vote because they understand what the outcome is. I mean, they see the same poll numbers we do. They hear from the same constituents, you know, so they understand, and they know that this is the one issue that will break the back of the political establishment, right? So that's part of the challenge. So, you know, it really is the tough question. We have the numbers. The bottleneck is the Texas legislature. So, you know, for us, from the standpoint of what we have to continue to do, there are really kind of three mechanisms, right? There's kind of a process in dealing with these guys. It's conversion, cooperation, or ultimately replacement. Okay. So we convert who we can convert. We elicit enough public pressure to force cooperation if necessary. And then those that refuse to do those two things, we have to replace. And so, you know, it's just part of the efforts. It's one of the reasons that the TNM, you know, we have the organization, we have a nonprofit that goes along with it that deals with sort of the more cultural aspects and the charitable work that we do. But it's also why we formed two political action committees. One specifically is a GPAC to support candidates that are pro-TEXIT, and another one is an SPAC or special PAC specifically for the referendum when it goes on the ballot. That said, last cycle was the first kind of time that we jumped out there in a real formal way and dealt with candidates. And so we put out what was called the Texas First Pledge, where people that signed it, regardless of what level of office they were at, they were pledging to support the referendum and some other Texas First policies, but primarily support for the referendum. And interestingly enough, with just sort of a late and soft launch, we had well over 100 candidates sign the pledge, including all the candidates for ag commission. Current sitting ag commissioner here in Texas, Sid Miller, he's one of our pledge signers. You know, at the time, James White, who was the chair of the Homeland Security Committee in the House, signed it. I mean, wow. You go look at it. It's at taketexasback.com. But I mean, you go look at the list of candidates from the state house to the schoolhouse. And if people thought that was crazy in that cycle, wait until they see just how much is happening in this cycle. Our intention is fully to go through those things. It's conversion, it's cooperation, or it's replacement. And we have the infrastructure, the volunteers, the people to make this happen. So that's how we eliminate the bottleneck.
Wow, that's fantastic. And when's the next big election that can move all this forward? Is that coming up in November?
Yeah, well, it won't be this November. So
In
let me kind of tell you
2024. Okay.
Yeah, so let me tell you where the sort of the timetable is right now. I mean, obviously, there's still an option for Abbott to add it to the call to special session. Okay,
Right.
and he's already called one special session and has indicated his willingness to call multiple special sessions related to certain pet projects that he's got, things that he thought the legislature didn't get done. We're in kind of uncharted territory here in Texas politics right now for a lot of different reasons, but there is still a possibility for Abbott to call it in a special session. Now, additional to that, we don't have true initiative here in Texas, but we do have it in a very limited instance where we can, by petition, force the question on a party's primary ballot. Now, granted, it's not sort of binding, but if we're talking about amping up political pressure, so we've launched a campaign back on June 6th to do exactly that. We're collecting signatures right now that we cross the threshold. We're collecting for both the Republican primary and the Democrat primary. We cross it, then Texans will be able to go into the polls during the primary elections in March and answer the question, should the state of Texas reassert its status as an independent nation? Mm-hmm. So, we're pushing the heck out of that petition campaign. But again, it's to further ramp up pressure to get Texans a binding vote on whether or not Texas should reassert its status as an independent nation. We want the people of Texas to be able to vote, whether they vote yes or no. We just want them to be able to have the option.
Have the option, right? Yeah, and I think most people that I know, if given the option in a reasonable and civil way, would choose TEXIT. There are people that couldn't live without the federal government. They can't. They don't understand, what do I do without Social Security but I think really you'd still get Social Security because you earned it.
Well, that's current federal policy is it doesn't matter where you live, and that's not just for Social Security; it's for any federal pension benefit.
Right, Medicare.
Yeah, any federal pension benefit that you have paid into and earned, you can collect no matter where you live. The only exceptions are places that are under banking sanctions. So the suggestion is, don't move to Syria, North Korea, Belarus, or Cuba, and you're okay.
Well, there goes my plans.
Yeah, that sounds like the worst vacation ever.
Yes, it does. Oh man, I'm kind of running out of things to ask because you've thoroughly covered everything, I believe. Is there anything I've missed that is important to get out there, especially out here? Remember, half my audience is outside the U.S. They don't know about this.
But by stunning coincidence, that's what we're looking to be as well outside the U.S. Look, I think it's important, just for anyone, right? Whether they're in the States or out of the States, I think it's important for everyone to remember a couple things. Number one is the maps that you were born with, the maps that you have today will not be the maps in the future, right? This is the way the trends move. Nothing stays the same forever. And so don't be shocked by conversations like this, because frankly, everyone around the world is already used to these sorts of conversations, right? They've had them all. They've had them for generations and for centuries. It's just the way that it works. But for everyone else, I want them to understand that what we're doing here in Texas is really about a fundamental right that we all have, and that is a right to self-determination, to determine how we are governed. Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution, which honestly, since that day in 1996, has been a bit of a guidepost. I mean, it's been the banner that I've marched under. It says that all political powers inherent in the people and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit. And the people of Texas stand pledged to the preservation of a republican form of government, and subject to this limitation only, they have at all times the inalienable right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in such manner as they may think expedient. It is ultimately what we are working for, is to be able to express our fundamental right of self-government, to be able to look at Washington, D.C. and say, you don't matter in our lives anymore. That our decisions, however they shake down, good, bad, we get to reap the benefits and pay for our good decisions and pay the consequences for our bad ones. But at the end of the day, our decisions are our decisions. And there is something to be said about the power of being able to create your own destiny. And so that's what we're looking to do here, to write the future for our children and grandchildren, and not have it written for us by people that we don't know, that do not know us, do not care about us.
And don't care. That's, I think, the operative term. They're all in it for themselves, and leaving very little left over for the rest of us. And I have to say, I really enjoy when people ask me where I'm from, and I say Texas, and they say, "Oh, American," and I say, "No, Texan. It's between the United States and Mexico."
That's it. We're the neutral zone.
Yes, exactly.
Sure feels
the
like
Romulans on one side and the Klingons on the other. Well, that's tell us how to find you and how to find information about TNM and TEXIT.
Sure. Look, I would encourage anyone who has any questions about the TEXIT issue to head to texitnow.org. That will take you specifically to the TEXIT section of the TNM's website. From there, you can jump off everywhere else. Obviously, I'm encouraging everyone to share the word, because let's be honest, big tech censorship, media censorship, it's a retail politics grind for us. So that so share the word. But anyone that lives in Texas, we're also encouraging them to get over today and sign the petition. Help us get across that finish line. We need 100,000 signatures on the Republican. We need about 60,000 on the Democrat to get it on that ballot. We'd like to do both, and we'd like to get it across the finish line as quickly as possible to give us the maximum amount of leverage leading up to it. So, that said, people can hit the petition link there at texitnow.org, or just go straight to texitpetition.com, and we're right there.
Beautiful. And what's the deadline on that? When do you have to get those in?
December the 1st is where we need to be, because we've got a chunk of verification that we still have to do.
Right.
So we need to get it in a couple of days early, but we have to match it and make sure that everybody that submits a petition signature is a registered voter. There's some things that we have to do. So December 1st is drop dead date for us. And we just need everybody to get over there and get that thing signed.
Okay, yeah, and that's coming a lot faster than anybody realizes. We've already shot half a year here, and it seems like we just got started.
Yeah, I mean, well, we only have an 180-day window. So from the moment we collect the first signature, we have 180 days to collect that bulk. And then, and so we also have to face up to the timeline that the ballot for the primaries gets set in December. So, we have a real fixed window of when this deadline has to be. And so we need everybody. And here's something that's interesting. We've done something pretty innovative with the petition as well, where we have first organization to ever deploy this, but it is a fully compliant with the Texas Election Code digital petition. So this has implications not just for this petition campaign, but honestly for any candidates that want to get on the ballot by petition, including independent candidates moving forward. So yet again, we're doing innovative things and making history, and that makes me happy.
God bless you. I hope it works, and sooner than later.
I'm ready to win.
Well, and I not only was I working on this 25 years ago, but even before that, both my grandfather and my father were both pro TEXIT, although at the time it was just secession.
Right.
Because even in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s, the U.S. government was overbearing. And it's orders of magnitude worse now. And I remember in the 80s, it was very popular for people to put secede stickers, bumper stickers on their cars. You saw them everywhere. So this is not a brand new issue. It didn't just spring up out of nowhere. In fact, it's been an issue since what, 1865? Was that when?
I would say it's been an issue since 1845.
1845,
since we joined
statehood.
I mean, we've had one foot out the door. I mean, the mistake that people make is thinking that Texans entered the Union thinking that, that we were going to be subservient to the United States. And what people don't understand is, we signed up for this thing. We're roommates, and that's where it ends. And we're tired of them leaving a sink full of dishes and clogging up the toilet, and it's time for them to go.
And eating all my good snacks too. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess one thing that people don't realize is that Texas was brought into the Union by a back door. It was a sneaky little deal between Polk and Sam Houston at the time, I believe, was the president. But Polk had made it part of his platform that he would bring Texas into the Union as a buffer with Mexico. And people don't realize that it wasn't a choice in terms of the general population. And when given that choice in 1860, they got out 4-1. And they were brought back in at gunpoint, literally. So I think the true Texas culture has always been one of independence. Just leave me alone. Let me do my thing. I'll pay reasonable taxes for services. But for the most part, I don't think people really need a lot of government. We don't need people telling us what to do all the time.
No, we
and
definitely
Texans
don't
are not
need
nanny staters.
No, look, if you're trying to get less government in your life, then it's, I'm not going to say that you're going to get none, but I am going to say, why don't you remove one layer that you don't need? And here's proof. We currently live under 180,000 pages of federal laws, rules, and regulations that if you printed them out on standard 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, A4, whatever you want to do, and you stack it, it would be taller than the San Jacinto Monument. We're being governed by 2.5 million unelected federal bureaucrats. We're in a position where if 100% of Texans made a decision about something and we all 100% agreed, it could be overridden right now at the stroke of a pen by some unelected, unaccountable federal judge or an executive order from the White House or some new law passed by the House of Reprehensibles in Washington, D.C. Yes. This is the situation that we live under. And so what that means is that we have a governor who doesn't really govern, a legislature that doesn't really legislate, and a Supreme Court that's anything but. And we as a people do not get to enjoy the very first words of our state constitution. Article 1, Section 1 starts with the words, Texas is a free and independent state. Well, guess what? It's not, but it's about to be.
Well, and I think that's a great place to leave it right there. That's a perfect closing quote. And I think with that, I want to thank you, Daniel, for your time. It's great to talk to you again. It's been way too long. And of course, I'm standing by if you need anything on my side of the planet. Do let me know. Hang on after I do the sign off. I want to talk to you a few more minutes if you have time.
Sure.
But for everybody else out there, please like, subscribe, share, comment, rinse and repeat, and stop by Radio Farside at any free speech forum. We're registered everywhere. And especially share this video, because I think it's important that not just Texans, but that everybody understands what's going on. Because from the sounds of it, the taste of independence is on the tip of my tongue, and it could happen at any moment. So let's all be prepared, and hopefully for those of us with independent minds, support this movement and get it over the line. Because I'd love to move home. And I thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's good to see you again.
Likewise.